welcome everyone to this episode of the Town Hall. It's Town Hall 123. It's Wednesday, and very excited to get into this. Glenn and I were talking about what we're going to talk about today. I'm also excited to announce our next one, which I'm really super excited about, which we're going to need all of your help with. So, all right, well, let's get going. Let's move on to the next slide, Maddie. All right. So we have myself, John Best. I'm the CEO of Best Innovation Group. If you don't know what we do a lot of things. We do a lot of coding, programming. We do a lot of strategies. We've got kind of an elite group that has been doing credit union technology since early 2000s. And so we're very fortunate to have the group we have. And we started this town hall in the middle of the pandemic, and here we are 4 years later, still going. And so I'm just so excited about the group that keeps coming every week or when we have these. And so thank you for joining us. Probably a lot of folks out that way that would normally join us that aren't with us today just because of the weather. Mike Lawson, I don't know if he's going to be here today,
I
but
believe he's at the Jack Henry conference, if I'm not
I think he
mistaken.
is too. He's at Scimitar. That's another reason we don't have a lot of people here today, because we do have a lot of Scimitar folks. I think he's out in San Diego. Um, but when Mike's here, Mike is incredible host, an incredibly nice person, and cares a lot about our industry. If you haven't gone to cubroadcast.com, you should. I don't know how he does it. He puts out like 10 a day or something. I have no idea. When does he sleep? People ask me that all the time, but really he is the epitome of that. So we're super thankful to have Mike on board. But today, filling in for Mike, if we go to our next slide, because he deserves his own slide,
Look at a slide.
is
Wow.
yeah, my friend Glenn Sarvati, also the co-host of the Big Cast since the day I started it, and which was a long time ago, 2014. And we're approaching 1,000 episodes, Glenn. I don't
Are
know
we
if you
really? Oh my gosh.
we're getting there. Um, so there's just so much stuff out there that Glenn does. But today, Glenn and I are going to sort of replay with some new news, kind of a podcast we did just recently. So we'll get into that in a minute. But Glenn, say hi to everybody and tell everybody what you do.
Sure. And I want to say also that it was a podcast that was last week's episode, and it was amazing how quickly these things change. A lot of new news broke last week around the Illinois interchange situation. So there's plenty more to get into. But I've
Yeah,
been
I'm
in the
excited.
credit union space for over 25 years. Worked a lot at the intersection of credit unions and financial technology, primarily with the payment side of things. I'll just leave it at that.
There- There's no one better than Glenn when it comes to payments. I can say that. I've spent so much time with him and learned so much. So, and thanks for joining me on this today, Glenn. I think it's going to be an interesting topic. Let's move on to the next one and talk about our sponsor wars. So first, it's now America's Credit Union, and I just wrapped up a couple weeks ago the CEO Council, which was amazing. It was a good 3 days. We just did a ton, and it inspired what's going to be our next town hall. So I'll get to that in a minute. But also, I know OME is coming up, the Tech OME conference, which is going to be awesome. They're really pushing it forward. Jim Nussle was there. He talked a lot about kind of what's been going on. One of the episodes I want to get to, Glenn, and we talked a little bit about this in our last podcast, is junk fees, particularly the politicization, if I can say that right, of junk fees and what's going on. Jim did a good job of laying that out, and I really was fascinated. I did some more research. So that's also where I discovered this issue we're about to discuss today. So if you haven't been to CUNA councils, they're keeping them going. So if you think that they're going away, they're not. America's Credit Union is continuing the councils, and they're even putting more effort into it. I got to say that the one I went to and had the pleasure of facilitating was fantastic. There were big and small credit unions there, but it was so much good information. We learned a lot about a lot of different subjects. So I was super excited about that. Um, and Glenn, look at this. One of our sponsors had the esteemed pleasure of winning the last Finovate.
Yes, I was going to mention. I think I mentioned on the last call as well. But Illuma came away with Best of Show at Finovate back in September in New York City, which is
Well,
basically
and
the top 10% designation of the 60 plus demos that you saw on stage there.
yeah, and I think these guys' time has come, and it definitely leads into the next episode that we're going to do of this. I think that they were always a good technology, but I think it's going to have to be, I think this technology is becoming table stakes. And I think that his demo really illustrated that. And that's why it resonated the way it did at Finovate. Because, it wasn't anything particularly, anytime you talk to Malin and you see what they're doing, you're going to see something new and exciting, and they're always on the move. But it's slow. It's not slow moving, but it's deliberate, updates. And I think that basically came to a head at Finovate. So we're going to try to make sure he's on for the next one because this next one's going to be very interesting. And then there's Typhone, who is just stepping it up. There's been a lot of movement in the home banking industry. There was the recent NCUA release, which was a little scary. So I think that there is this new opportunity that I think Typhone's tapping into of what does home banking of the future look like? And for me, what I think is that um, the current product that is, I want to call it a search engine. I compare it to Google versus Perplexity. So for those of you, maybe Maddie can toss this in the chat. Google is a search engine in the sense that you tell it something and it goes out and it gets a bunch of different options and you look through it. Now, they are trying at the top of the screen to do what Perplexity does, which is to give you an answer, but it doesn't even come close to what Perplexity AI does, in my opinion. I think that today's home banking is like Google, a very useful tool and allows you to log in, get what you need. But I think that the future is more of a perplexity.ai type interface for that. And I think Typhoon sees that writing on the wall with the people they've hired. Glenn, when we were out at Connect, they brought one of their folks who was one of the main guys doing AI at Meta and for Microsoft.
That's right. Yeah.
And it was awesome to hear him speak about this stuff and how it's going. And just recently, in the last, I don't know, I mean, we continue to see big breakthroughs in the AI space. So it's awesome to see an industry, leader like Typhoon break into that space. And honorable mention is Bonify. Bonify has been working with Illuma and another product who maybe was a little ahead of their time, and now, their time has come. And we're seeing a use case for that a lot, particularly in light of all the fraud. So check these guys out if you haven't. If you don't have, just to tell you what Illuma does real fast, if you don't have a way of just identifying people when they call into your call center via their voice so that you know for sure it's them and not taking 5, 6, 7 minutes to do it, you certainly need to look into it. There was a time when this technology, I think, was a little cost prohibitive for most credit unions, but I think Illuma's brought that into the fold. And if you're out there looking, maybe not to replace your home banking, but to augment it, particularly with payments, FedNow being the big one, RTP, all of the different options on top of your home banking, Typhoon's a great place to go. So go check all that out and we'll move along. So next slide. All right, today's giveaway. Ooh, we're giving away $100 Apple gift card. You know what you could buy with a $100 Apple gift card? You could buy 2 dongles. No, I'm just kidding. And an Apple Pen sold, maybe. No, that is gonna be a good thing, particularly if you use iTunes. I buy a lot of movies, and my suggestion for you is to purchase the just came out and you can buy it. Logan, what is it? Wolverine and Deadpool. Saw it yesterday, almost bought it. But I'm thinking I may want to purchase that physically on Blu-ray. I don't buy a lot of movies anymore, but that, generally if one I really like, I might buy it. But this is sponsored by the great William Mills Agency, who is one of the sponsors of our IC and also the sponsor of our giveaway every week. And we're excited to have them. They're a great group. Hopefully they're on today because they always help with the giveaway. So everybody, we're happy to have William Mills around, and put your name into the chat along with your credit union. You must be a credit union employee. So you can't win, Elliot. You're not the guy. Even if you're in a hurricane, it doesn't change anything. You still can't be the guy. But the rest of you put your name in. And at the end of this, we do the wheel of spin. And maybe today we'll let Glenn press the button. I just don't know. But yeah, put your name in and we'll get it set up for the end of this. All right. Your name and credit union, please. All right, let's go on to the next one.
I love this. I love this graphic.
Why, thank you. I actually made this today. I finally figured out how to get AI to not misspell stuff for the most part. our normal great graphics person who is normally on these calls, she is in Sarasota, Florida, so everybody keep her in mind. Jackie, um, she does all of our graphics and she is amazing. But Glenn had an idea and she knew that she was going to be jammed trying to take care of her family and dealing with the weather. So she threw it out there and said, "Hey, maybe you could give this a shot in AI." And I said, no, because it has words in it and AI is awful at words. And I mentioned to a friend and he said, "No, it's good now." And I said, "Really?" So I went and I looked and sure enough, uh, I was able to get this. You want to tell the story of this and get us going,
Yeah,
Glenn?
this goes back to the podcast we did. Again, the Illinois, there's some people call it double I, but just Interchange Fee Prohibition Act, the IFPA is what
Which to
we're
me just
talking
sounded
about.
like an IPA,
And that
which
was where this comes from, is in the, John was just riffing in the podcast, IFPAs. Oh, IPA. Ooh, this is a bad IPA. I don't want to drink that IPA.
yeah,
So
it's very bitter. Ugh,
we
nobody
came
wants.
up with the worst IPA you ever tasted. We'll explain why as we go through this. If you haven't been following along, this is one of those, in my mind, a case study of why it's essential for credit unions to stay on top of what's going on in legislative bodies, even when it's not in their state, because this is I don't know what you want to call it, if it's contagion, infiltration, whatever you want to call it, but it's not staying within the confines of Illinois. There's already been other states that have started been emboldened with the merchant lobby trying to go in a similar path, and it's going to be an interesting story.
So let's get into it. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. And why don't you kind of bring it up here and get us up to speed? I know you had
Yeah,
some slides. And
and
before you do, I'm just gonna throw out one thing.
yeah,
So when I was at the conference for the CEOs, we had several that were there who were on the they've been apparently, and this is the most interesting thing. So this was the credit union I was talking about is Educational Personnel FCU. It was Hope Garrett, and she was sharing that she is on the calls. And so I guess the ICBA, that's the Community Banking Association, is that correct?
IBA is the Illinois Bankers Association, and I
Right,
believe
but she's been on calls with them, like the banks and the community banks are getting together on calls to talk about this, which I just wanted to start there and say, wow.
well, the
Like when
credit
she
union
mentioned it, we were all kind of a little, like, wow. But go ahead.
and yeah, and I believe Tom Kane, if I'm not mistaken, is on the call, from president of the Illinois Credit Union League, and he was gracious enough. We interviewed him for a podcast back when this was relatively new news, and just before the ICUL and the Illinois Bankers Association and the ABA and America's credit unions all got together and collaborated on filing a lawsuit contesting the provisions of the act. So again, the collaboration, there is plenty of common cause here. When you get down to bad legislation, and this one is again a case study for how not to write legislation. There's plenty of opportunity for us all to work together toward a common cause. But just really quickly, for those of you who have not been following along, this all came to pass kind of at a truly 11th hour overnight kind of proposition in June, when the state of Illinois was passing. And Tom, please, whether in the chat or just unmute yourself if I say anything wrong, please correct me. Passed is part of the annual budget process in the state of Illinois. They had a budget deficit. They were trying to figure out how to balance the budget. One of the things they started doing was looking at removing tax advantages that existed for certain industries. One of the things they looked at was slicing the tax deduction that merchants could take as part of their role of collecting tax revenues in the sales tax area. This did not make the merchants too happy. They said, "Well, what can we do to calm you down?" They said, "Well, we'd love to do that." And this is something that's been shopped around state by state by the merchants for some time. But at the dark of night, when nobody else had a chance to really look at it and kind of point out the flaws to it, they said, "How about this thing here, where basically don't let us be charged on the portion of interchange that's actually attributable to state taxes, and let's not charge for tips either, because we don't get anything out of that. Why should we be paying for the interchange on tips that just go to our employees?" Done. Okay, we'll do that. So that's how it got into the law. Right off the bat, it sounded pretty crazy. But the governor did sign it by the end of the month. So it was signed into law. It doesn't officially take effect until July of 2025, which basically gives you about a year's worth of runway to manage to implement the provisions. And we'll get into that. That is an extremely short runway when you compare it to a lot of other things that we tend to do. But again, as I mentioned, any state taxes that come through any kind of a bill, and don't forget, not only are you talking about, I think it varies in Illinois from 6, 7, it probably doesn't go any lower than 7%, and probably up to 9 and 10% in some of the Chicago counties. That share of any kind of receipt at the point of sale you could not tax that portion of it. That's not the way the system usually works in terms of how we figure out interchange. And also tips. Anything that is actually paid and given directly to the employee also cannot be imposed or interchange attached to it. We'll get back to the data usage prohibitions later, but this is another piece that I think it was an attempt to make sure that things continued to go the way they wanted to, and they closed some loopholes, but in the process they made things even worse. And then possibly strangest of all, if the systems don't work to allow this to be done manually, they say, oh, the merchants can just basically wrap up their receipts, put them in a shoebox, mail them in to the issuer, and they've got to issue an after the fact rebate on the interchange they paid on state taxes. And they got to do it in 30 days. A very, very manual process for what is supposed to be an automated process. Yeah, John.
Yeah. So just before we get to the next slide, I have a couple questions. The first one is, so you're saying this was sort of a last minute thing, right?
Yeah.
Normally, from my experience with America's Credit Union / CUNA / NAFQ, we're pretty good at knowing this stuff is kind of coming. This one seems to have caught us by surprise to get signed. Am I wrong about that?
If you really get down to it, it's the state of Illinois, and Dick Durbin's name's going to come up in this later. That's how the Durbin Amendment got passed as well. It was a last minute addition that got kind of slid in when it was too late to actually react. And yeah, apparently this, and again, I'm not sure if Tom's on, but if he wants to weigh in, this was a true last minute surprise because it really came out of nowhere. And again, proof of exactly how this plays out is after Illinois did this, very quickly, Pennsylvania looked to do the same thing, but it was no longer a surprise. And it got batted back and kind of pushed out to committee pretty quickly. So, that one is.
Yeah,
so
I can jump in if you want.
Please do, Tom. Yeah.
Hey, John. This is Tom Kane.
Introduce yourself, by the way, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, this is, we've been sort of living this, and to your point, John, this is highly unusual, but elsewhere, but not necessarily in Illinois. So what ended up happening is, this did come completely out of the blue. This was a proposal that was brought up about 3 or 4 years ago, got no traction at all, never got a committee hearing and never got anything. And so as Glenn rightly described it, the governor was worried about getting the budget, resistance to the budget from the retailers. So he called in at the last minute. It was President of the Senate, Speaker of the House, and the governor called in the manufacturers the Merchants Association, my counterpart there, and said, what is it going to take to you not to oppose our budget? And the guy pulled this out, which had not been vetted, not been looked at, no hearings, nothing, and said, well, how about this? And the governor, not knowing anything about any of this, just said, okay, that sounds good. Because he thinks this is all voluntary as well, because of that last provision that John,
right? Because this is deep financial stuff that not everybody understands.
Yeah, and so it was buried in the budget, and so we were called they called us on a Thursday night, and on Saturday it was and it was in the budget, and everybody was leaving town because they wanted to get out, and they basically passed it at 3 a.m. Without. By then, there were no hearings, there were no committee meetings or anything like that, and it was just done. And then that was passed on the one side, and then the other side was told, you can only vote up and down on the budget. You can't make any changes to it. So by then, we did get a hearing, but it didn't matter because, you either voted for the budget, the entire budget, or none of it. And nobody wanted to be the person to, and so there was maneuvers going on, and probably some illegal moves that were made at literally at 3:30 in the morning. Um, that and everybody was putting all sorts of pressure on people to vote for it. So anyway, it all got through. But we had no idea 2 days before this was even signed, or 2 days before it was passed by both houses, that this was even a possibility. But that's Illinois, though. I mean, that's how we got CRA jammed on us at literally at 5 o'clock in the morning with no hearings, no floor discussion, no debate. It's all
Wow.
behind the scenes. So
Yeah, and and my question was, is that um was that calculated, do you think, or do you think it was just sort of the way it unfolded?
no, because I don't think if you were to ask the governor today what is interchange, I don't think he has any idea what interchange is. And we've talked to the Speaker of the House and we've talked to the Senate President, and the Senate President, who has a technical background, just says, "Oh, there's all this requires is some coding changes." And I went on to explain, the payments ecosystem is a little more complicated than that, and a few more players than just telling Visa to make a few code changes. But that's sort of his mentality on this.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that people don't understand it, but that's also kind of concerning as well because there's a big part of it that when they don't understand the risks and what are involved, and they also don't even get me started on debit versus credit and signature, which also makes it more complex. Yeah, I was just curious about that. It was something I wanted to ask. What's her name from America's Credit Unions, the
Carrie
econ.
Hunt.
Yeah, I wanted to ask
Yeah,
Sherry that.
I mean, we were in ground zero for all of that, and actually, when they started to talk about what's the response, we were looking at legislative response. But we thought that that's uncertain and could take a very, very long time. So then it was like, okay, then because there is a massive coalition of, it's the banking associations, the credit union associations, the electronic payments coalition, which is, the Visa, MasterCard, the card processors. There's all these groups come together, on and that's when we decided to file a lawsuit, brought in America's credit unions, because this obviously has a much, much bigger impact than just Illinois. Visa, MasterCard, Bank of America, they're all afraid of just a domino effect that could happen from one state to the next to the next. And they will all be different.
Yeah, that's the piece of Pennsylvania that was interesting when they pushed it through. For whatever reason, they did not include gratuities. So you then all of a sudden, okay, you got two different states with two different rules, and then 48 other states doing it the old way. And how many different flavors can you come up with? And I mean,
So
that's stated pretty well. We'll get to that, but from the OCC's response, because they weighed in favor of the position of the bankers and the credit unions in terms of the challenges with this.
so I did some math on $100 transaction, and because I wanted to see how much you'd lose per transaction. Has anybody done that math? Have you guys done it at the uh, league, the
Oh,
ICUL?
sure. Yeah.
So
I mean, the
what did
hundred
you guys
dollar
come
thing
up
is a
with?
good, particularly if you're talking about a dining thing, right? So
Yep.
you get $100 plus you do a 20% tip, and there's a 6%, so that's 26%, and you can just go on a 2%. I mean, it's pennies really is really what it ends up being, except
But
when
yeah,
you're
it's up when there's 1,000 of them, right?
yeah,
6% state tax, and I'm going with a 15% chip because I'm
yeah,
cheap.
okay.
But basically, for that transaction, you lose 37 cents. Uh, if it's a debit, you lose a penny. I mean, you just don't lose a lot when that happens. But 37 cents per transaction, that's significant. Um, that did you guys do calculations? For example, over the years, we've done a lot of strategy, Glenn and I, with other organizations, and we usually come up to somewhere around 23 to 26% of non-interest income is interchange at the average credit union. Is that about where you guys are these days?
Yeah, I think I mean, we have a lot of small credit unions in the state, so the
Mm.
ones that don't even have a debit or credit, but that's reasonable within
Yeah.
the reasonable amount. So
And then if the average transaction is, the rest of what you would get. So you lose 37 cents on that transaction, but you get the other dollar is about what it would be, right? Because it's like it would have been $1.26, and you're losing a little more than that 20 because it's 126. Anyways, bottom line is that um that is as much with the sales tax and the tip as a third of the transaction is what it comes down to. And so
And that's not even taken into account. And Madison, if you could go to the next slide, because I think some of the things we're talking about are already there about the
yeah,
complications. But if that doesn't even take into account the effort and the cost of actually implementing what would be necessary to make these changes. It's a one-time cost up front. And the piece that I just keep hoping, but I think obviously I'm being way too optimistic, that some of the small merchants may wake up and say, wait a second, this isn't going to do us any good. You've got, if you have to replace the terminals, some of the smaller merchants can't do this without replacing terminals. And again, I think that's one of the points you're making. No problem then, just put all your receipts in a box and we'll get it back some other way. Think about the cost to both sides on that one too. But again,
yeah. In the podcast, we talked about the old Amex. Remember that when Amex, they used to have to ship on Amex, you used to get your receipts printed on there. People love that. But you had to have them in the box.
back to the knuckle buster day where you got what, four different
Yeah.
copies you got to work through and then pass them along to different parties. But terminal replacement for small merchants, I mean, who's going to fund that? How many transactions do they have to go through before they've actually covered the cost of the upgrades that they're going to have to do on this?
And one of the things we didn't talk about that you brought up last time is down there at the bottom, which was the data privacy piece of it. So it's interesting. There's that new sort of thing that I saw in there where it says there's limits on what you can do with the data. Because one of the things that I really went after hard for a lot of years, and I got close, really close, was I had this dream of improving home banking by being able to see the receipt of what you bought. And I'm talking like not the, hey, I spent $200 at Home Depot. I spent $200 and here's all the items. And here's what they actually bought. And if you remember, Glenn, when MCX was sort of rolling around, that was a big part of that play. And that came down to that the merchants don't want you to know the SKUs of what they bought
Right.
because they're worried, A, that that'll get shared with their competitors. So Home Depot's worried Lowe's will sell it to Lowe's and vice versa. But this actually gets you closer to that. I mean, if you're going to rework it, you might as well. But then they prohibited it. And
Well, I mean, that's again, it's kind of the law of unintended consequences, just kind of cascading through. And keep me honest on this, Tom. But one of the objections that was made is we don't look at the information at this level of detail. We have to go back in and look at what's the tax, what's the tip. We have to
yeah,
break
we
it.
don't know. We just get
There-
transactions.
There was some conversation that said, well, is it going to be that like you'll have to actually run two credit card ones, one for the gratuity and one for the actual balance? Well, one of the responses was, okay, well, we'll let you, you can take a look at that information. Well, now you got data privacy issues. Well, you can look at the information, but you can't do anything else with it other than this, and you can't share it with anybody. Well, we share it with other people today because that's one of the ways we defend against fraud. So you're putting a new rule in place that actually makes it tougher to do some of the things that we want to do with credit cards and debit cards, is actually defend against bad actors. Fair statement,
Yeah.
Tom?
Good, Tom.
Tom's on mute. He's not objecting. So I
I'm
guess
sorry. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, because I'm trying to think of it. There's 5 or 6 pieces of information that currently leave a point of sale system. Because one of the points is that, that people, that proponents make is, all that information is being captured because you're being handed a receipt that has all the details on it. But right now, by the time it gets through the whole network of different hops that it makes, there's only 5 or 6 pieces and only $1 amount. So all of a sudden, there's going to have to be a whole lot more information shared with the acquirers, the issuers, the processors, the associations. All of them are going to get this data. And I think what they were concerned about is, well, now that they've got all that data, could they turn around and utilize that in some sort of way? Could they sell it? Could they whatever? So that's really what this is all about, is that, no, you can have that data to be able to do what you need to do, but you can't use that in any other sort of way. So,
This to me is the downside of one of the real beauties of what's happened over time in the credit union space is the card networks just work. No one has to think about the complexity that happens behind the scenes. They just do what
Oh,
they're
and there
supposed
used to be a
to do.
time when you'd have to look at the bug on the back of your card and get a magnifying glass out and look at the giant number of little stickers on the gas station. But
And
you know what's interesting is that,
you sound like a boomer the second you say that, because
yeah, I know, but it's
80% of the
true.
population has never had to deal with that.
That's why I used to carry, remember the old mobile fob? Little, that was
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
That thing worked. But interestingly enough, just to throw something out there, so I am someone who can actually speak to the protocol between how all this works. And so ISO 8583, I've certified several networks in that model. And it is an ancient protocol that has been updated here and there. It's one of our biggest problems with shared branching is that that protocol is so old and now it's getting taken advantage of for fraud. But that protocol has nothing, zero in it to deal with anything like this. And the lift that it would take to do, because here's the thing, out at the front end at the fancy, iPad white, terminals that we all have now, these Clover devices and all the different things, that's a very, that part of it actually won't be that hard to code if they really want to do that, because it's got a nice front end. But what's going to happen is the only way I could see getting this done in time that they want is the terminal will have to separate it into two transactions. Can you imagine what your statement will look like when it comes through and you've got, one with, one without, so you see the transaction come through, then you see the tax and possibly the gratuity as well as three items in there, because there's no way that I can think of between now and July of 2025 that you could modify that. Now there is a new ISO protocol that's been pushed out, I think it's 2022 or 2222, that is supposed to replace that. It's more of an XML feature, but even that's behind the eight ball because it created a lot of bloat. So technically, the only way I can see implementing it would be at the far end, and it has to get separated. So my question to you, Tom and Glenn, do you think, because the easier way to handle this is just not to charge interchange at all, right? Do you think that there's like a Trojan horse in this? Like they knew they asked for something that was technically impossible. So now their next move will be to say something along the lines of, well, there is an easier way. Let's just get rid of it altogether. There's very little fraud. Why worry about it? Do you think this is a gateway drug into that?
I think that's giving him too much credit for thinking through this. But I think and the answer to that immediately is nobody's going to do this for free, right? Nobody's doing this for free. So I mean, we've had a lot of discussions about, what is the action to take, and the whole thing is we'll process what we're getting paid for, and we will not process what we're not getting paid for. So that's where you get into the cash. You got to go pay for cash to do your tip and your tax. And that's probably the most serious thing that they're considering, I'd say, as a short-term thing, because they can't get it done technically by July 1st of next year. That just won't happen. I mean, it took 8 years.
Can you imagine the
chip
backlash
cards.
from that?
Yeah, I mean, and all the different point of sale systems have to support this as well, which will cost those small merchants something. So
and none of them have the guts, do they? Is what it comes down to. Or maybe it's just like the consumers and they don't get it. They don't understand what's coming down the pike, because I have to think that the majority of merchants will come out worse in the process.
Well, certainly in the short term. I mean, they may over time,
yeah.
but if you're a merchant that has to worry about, cash flow and everything, do you want to spend $1,500 a terminal to upgrade those terminals? A lot of them, a lot of small merchants, you're a little dry cleaner, you got two of those things and they cost you $3,000. How long is it going to take to get that money back out of any sort of thing anyway? I mean, they got to pay the money up front to fix those, to upgrade those terminals or replace them. So they're not going to be happy about that. They're also, they're not going to be happy about, the reaction if somebody has to swipe twice or pay something in cash or something like that. So that's, I guess, the nuclear option in all this is they just come out and say, we're not processing tax or gratuities.
And
Well,
we're not going to process.
If the payback period's that long, the average life of a typical small business owner, I mean, the business might survive, but you may wind up selling it off. The person who actually is incurring the cost is probably not going to be around long enough in a small mom and pop shop situation to reap the benefit.
I mean, I think what most of them, you have your manual workaround. Most of them will just say, you know what, we're just going to collect the receipts, and it's a 6 month period. So if they have they can do it for 6 months, collect all the receipts, send them to their merchant bank. So whoever the local bank is that they're using for merchant services, send it to them, and they have, as you mentioned, 30 days to get it all figured out and give them their rebate back, which is just impossible to think about. You'd be getting a bank and a local community bank or whatever that's doing merchant services could be getting dozens and dozens of these people dropping off receipts and thousands of receipts, weighing through those things to figure out what's valid, what's not valid. I mean, the fraud stuff in this goes through the roof. And then that local merchant bank then has to figure out how do they collect from everybody else, the issuing bank, because they're not going to just take it on the chin.
Yeah,
And
because you lose it along the way for the acquisition as you cross each boundary to get to wherever it is. I was thinking that like somebody like Kohl's could work out. They could just give it all back in Kohl's cash, which nobody could use anyways. So that
well,
works out.
I mean, I think that's the easiest path for merchants, though, is just I'm not going to update my point of sale system. Whatever this can be in place by July 1st, because it's all manual that has to be done. So we had a couple of credit unions. You mentioned Hope from Education Personnel. She's our federal one that we got to join the lawsuit. We have another state chartered credit union that we got to join the lawsuit because those are the actual injured parties in all of this. And they went through and they tried to estimate what it's going to cost. I mean, one of them does 22,000 transactions a month. And the idea of trying to figure out what's going on with those 22,000 transactions, and if you're Chase Bank and you're doing millions a day, transactions,
yeah.
I have no idea how you do manage all that.
Well, it's the Mike Cook principle, right? If you cost me a penny, you just cost me $1 million because we do a billion transactions. So there's a couple comments I wanted to just reach out and get you guys' feedback on. So the first one is from Rob Goodyear. Rob is a frequent visitor of ours and has done a lot in this space, and also an entrepreneur who understands this space pretty well. Rob, from your point of view, you think that one other approach, and I was thinking this too, was how do I smooth all this out into one transaction? Why don't you share what you just said? I want to see if we've heard
it's
that
nuts.
going on
I
there.
mean, seriously, the cure is more expensive than the disease, right?
Right.
I mean, how
Especially if
does
you're a
this make
merchant.
sense? Look at the Paperwork
doesn't.
Reduction Act across government. But look, the other thing too, John, you touched on level 2 and level 3 data. That's so noisy that it can't be inbound within the transaction settlement
No, not possible
data
in
loop.
The current
Not
platform.
possible. You're going to get latency, failures,
Yeah.
congestion.
Well, you wouldn't be able to make the turnaround time that the network demands. There's you have to
Yeah.
respond in 5 seconds, or it goes into
Right. Latency.
throwback or stand-in.
Yeah. So forget it. There'll be this horrible cascade of failure and anger, broken SLAs. I mean, forget it. This is nuts.
That's an interesting point. Is if you start failing, do the SLAs still apply if you've totally changed the rules of engagement?
Yeah, and hey, good luck letting all the lawyers earn their
more
wages
costs.
litigating that, right? So this is nuts. I mean,
You get chargebacks. I mean, that's a pain in the neck anyway right now, and the chargeback rights and how long it takes for somebody to,
Yeah.
I mean,
It's the same problem with fallbacks, right? It's almost the same
just
thing you have with fallbacks with
all
EMV.
that.
I mean, at a certain point, this is
I mean,
interfering
the
with
one
business.
thing is this thing is written. It is written so badly that it's easy to make the points. I mean, the judge that we're currently looking to get an injunction with on this, clearly, it's not an interchange expert. I mean, she kind of said, I need some time to look through all this. But I think the arguments are pretty simple to make on some of these things. I mean, there's a lot of detail
I think Tom might have blipped out a little bit on it.
Yeah, I think he
But-
fell off.
I think he'll be back in a minute.
Madison,
Uh,
can you go to the next slide too? I wanted to also respond. Gary Coates had a couple of
Yeah,
things.
Gary had a really good point. I was going to hit Gary next. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Glenn.
Go ahead. I was going to say I had that same experience. Gary, you mentioned that you tend to pay only in cash when you're talking with tips because it's better for the employee. I do the same thing. We have one restaurant here in town that very quietly and graciously asks if you can do that. And I think I've shared this before on the call. I kind of firsthand saw this. My daughter worked at a fairly high-end restaurant here just before COVID and resigned at the end of the year. She worked through New Year's Eve. She was still, and they didn't cheat her out of tips, but she was still getting tips for another 2.5 months.
Wow.
That's how long it took before they would actually clear it through. So she got in her case, it actually worked out pretty well. It gave her a little bit of a run rate after she'd stopped working. But
Yeah,
why
but it's
should
much
someone have to
quicker.
wait that long to get their money?
Right. That's the other thing. And it's much quicker. They just take the cash, put it in their pocket. And I'm not paying a tip on a tax. We don't, in Oregon, we don't have a sales tax, but I frequently go to Washington and they do, which I always forget about and makes me mad. But I'm not going to pay a tip on the tax amount. And they all run it all together on the bill. They give you the estimated tax for 20% or whatever. And then some restaurants locally are adding a 3% service tax or not service tax, a service fee or something is what they call it. It's to cover the credit card charge. If you use a card to pay, it's 3% less if you pay with cash.
For the first time, I was at a restaurant, a couple restaurants in New York City, and they literally had that printed. I mean, they literally had the two prices directly on the menu. It wasn't like a line at the bottom that said, and somebody else just put in Justin says, cash discount. You can make it the carrot or the stick. But in that case,
Right.
They literally had the two different prices laying right next to each other if on each individual item, which I thought was kind of a strange way of doing it, but it makes it a lot easier or a lot harder to claim you missed the fine print. And then you get into those questions of they just automatically put it on the bill usually because they assume you're paying by card. So then it's almost an
Right.
inconvenience if you want to have them reprint the thing and get your 3% discount.
Right. And I've had multiple servers thank me for paying them in cash.
I'm sorry, say it again.
I've had multiple servers thank me for paying
Yes.
in cash.
Yes, me too. And I also find it ironic. I think I mentioned this before. Is I've been to at least 2 cashless enterprises, small businesses here in Atlanta, who still have tip jars. You can't pay cash, but they're more than happy to take the tip that way. Oh, and by the way, we will take your cash as long as you don't want change. So really, I mean, I understand that they don't want to have to deal with that. It slows down the process, but they're not really cashless.
Yeah.
So on this screen here, we went over a lot of things in the lawsuit, but
Yeah, we're gonna run low on time. I don't know if Tom managed to get back in.
yeah, I wanted to hear the big thing is if I'm Jim Yates, who's sitting in Wyoming, who to me, I don't think they have a state tax in Wyoming, if I remember right. We definitely do in Colorado.
Let's hold on a second. Hold on a second. I don't think that's entirely true. I think people often forget about gasoline.
Good point.
I think and gasoline tax on a state level is usually, I think, higher than it is on regular sales tax. So
I think we have sales tax.
you do have
Okay.
sales tax?
Yeah, so if I'm Jim and I'm trying to understand, so I just wanted to see from Pennsylvania shot it down, but is this popping up elsewhere, or generally we see something like this happen and then it sort of makes it whoever it is that got it going the first time starts pushing it out to the rest of the states, or is this it's going to die on the vine? And I don't know. I'm curious.
It's not going to die on the vine. Pennsylvania. I mean, don't forget this just happened at the end of June. We're not that far down the path.
Oh, I know.
And Pennsylvania had it happen already. I do know that and again, because it was not a out of left field kind of thing, it came up in Georgia. It got put out to a study committee. So that's happening now.
That's actually, it came up, but it wasn't shot down. Now it's being researched.
It was kind of slow rolled on the side. Yeah, it didn't get a ton of traction, but it's at least being researched. And we've only got our legislature in session for 100 days every year here. So it basically is, punted until the next legislature. It came in Florida, it got to the same point of getting the study committee, and then DeSantis actually line item vetoed the study committee. So you've got action in a bunch of different places where this is coming up. I think Tom already mentioned that, the positioning on the lawsuit is there is a desire to work with the legislature and say, let's figure out how we make this make sense. But we can't take the chance. The clock is ticking. Even if we did absolutely everything, it would take a Herculean feat to have anything in place by July 2025. Probably impossible. So, we can't take the risk that negotiations with the legislature are going to work. So that's why the lawsuit's in place.
Well, and
And
let's talk about that. So the lawsuit will basically buy time, or is it that,
Well, the
you know,
lawsuit basically saying this doesn't work. It actually violates federal statutes that and that's what the OCC weighs in on as well. It should just be unconstitutional. But at a very minimum, it actually forces the courts to take a harder look. I don't think I put the quote in here, but I know Tom was quoted saying what we want to make sure is that this gets the careful consideration that it deserves. And by filing the lawsuit on an absolute minimum, someone's got to look at the details and slow down to do that.
So yeah,
just real,
so
if
I
you're
mean
not-
the lawsuit itself could take years. I mean, it'll take many months at a minimum, probably years to work through. But in the meantime, July 25th or July of 2025 is coming up. So there's an injunction request that's saying, stop all work on this. It's not going to go into effect until the lawsuit gets settled. So that's the next kind of phase in all of this and really the main constitutional argument against this is preemption, that the state is trying to preempt or force national credit unions, national banks, and now they're national organizations from complying with a state law, and that preemption is a standard thing out there that says a state can't force a national organization to follow its rules. So in fact, what our attorney general just came back and said is, well, that may be true, but the state chartered ones still have to, no matter what, which is kind of an interesting thing that he'd throw the state ones under the bus as a potential option for the injunction. But so all this is coming up within the next couple of weeks. We're going to hear about the injunction. So if we have that, at least everything can kind of stop while the lawsuit moves forward over the next year or two.
Madison, can
And
you go to the next?
I'm sorry, real quick. So legislatively, what that will do is probably put a freeze everywhere on this, because people won't want to move forward with legislation when there's a court hearing or when there's a court.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that. So it actually freezes the other states as well. Matt, and Tom, I thought I read that like there was supposed to be the next finding about the injunction basically as early as the end of this week. But now we have a flood of these amicus briefs that have come in. Is that likely to slow that process? Because you have to go back and consider all these. I think others get to respond to them, et cetera.
I think what we're looking for is probably the week of the election, so the first week of November.
Okay.
I think the hearing is set for the end of the month, and it's unlikely the judge will make a decision right at the hearing time. She'll probably want to listen to what both sides have to say and then take a week or two. So we're probably mid-November before we get a ruling on the hearing for the injunction.
So I want to keep us on time here. We still got a giveaway and I want to get in the other thing. So Tom, what should folks on this call who are in other states who are keeping an eye on this, what should be their action, between now and then? What should they do?
I think just making sure that they're letting their leagues know that that this is a concern. I am been talking to the leagues, of course, about all of this and keeping them up to date. But just with their own legislatures coming in, just to make sure that nothing like this happens to them, and that any bills that would come up just get squashed immediately. And the argument of, well, let's just wait to see what happens in Illinois is not a bad one. Because I can tell you, though, our legislators don't want to be put in between financial institutions and don't want to have to make that choice between financial institutions and merchants. Two very, very strong lobbies. And I've worked with politicians enough to know that they don't want to have to make a decision and pick one over the other. They're friends with both, and they don't want to make an enemy of them. So So I think that needs to be reminded to, that to politicians is just to wait and see what happens here in Illinois. So they don't need to do anything until that. And it really should be something at the federal level anyway. I mean, it's ridiculous that, all the players in the world will have to comply with a different rule in Illinois, but it could even be worse when
Yeah, it
every
could be
state
different in
their own.
Pennsylvania and then different again in Tennessee and so forth and so on. How the
Yeah.
heck would you even do it? Then what do you do with people like large box retailers who are in all of these? It's just ridiculous. I mean,
Yeah, so
it's
the really the highest level point is the system isn't broken right now. It works fine. Consumers benefit from it. They love their cards. Don't mess it up.
yeah. Ain't broke.
Tom, were you surprised? I mean, I'm not going to read this slide, but the OCC, the control of the currency, put in their own amicus brief, siding with the banks and credit unions with what I thought was remarkably strong wording. I mean,
Yeah, no, that was great.
From an agency.
When you have a regulator that comes in and describes, as you put in there, as an ill-conceived, I mean, all the language that they used, that was the best kind of testimony or support that we could possibly get. We are in the process of trying to figure out how to get the NCUA also to weigh in on this. But it's a danger, I would say, to certainly the payment system, but also all the financial institutions. It puts it at risk, for all the reasons described. I mean, from a financial perspective, because one of the things to mention is every violation is potential $1,000 fine, every single violation. So
violation equals a transaction.
Yeah, per
Individual
transaction. So somebody,
RPA.
Yeah, I mean, it could be millions of dollars in a single day for a credit union that they could be
yeah.
at risk if they do something wrong.
Wouldn't the credit union that you said is a party to your suit and that's actually kind of demonstrated the cost ramifications, wouldn't that, I'm sure you've sent that to the NCUA, that doesn't persuade them to weigh in?
Well, the concern ends up being with the NCUA is whether or not they're allowed to be able to do that. Whether or not we're not sure that they'll want to do it or that they're going to be allowed to do it. OCC, for some reason, they didn't hesitate and they came right out with a pretty strong.
I was going to say, I thought maybe that might open the floodgates. Madison, just real quickly, there's just 2 more slides I want to touch on real fast. This is the flip side. And then after that came in Senator Durbin, author of the Durbin Amendment, put out he kind of, makes other arguments, which to me don't really seem all that strong. So, you can just read there what he put in there. He says, well, we're consistent with the Durbin Amendment, which I thought was kind of an odd phrase because the OCC wasn't really stacking it up against the Durbin Amendment. They were stacking it up against a whole bunch of other things that are also issues. Tom, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that last one. The reality is issuers have long, utilized these kind of chargebacks to require merchants to pay back. That's kind of a red herring, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we don't have any sort of relationship. I mean, it's really kind of sad because he's our senior senator and, he's right in the middle of all of this. And we don't really have much of a relationship with him because of what happened 10 years ago or 12 years ago. So, he's just looking for any sort of support for his own bill to do this at the national level. So,
one last thing on the last slide, and Tom, we haven't talked about this. This came up since the last time we talked. I just found this to be, well, first off, talk about like really, detailed reporting. They misspelled Springfield in the dateline when ABC put this out. But I was traveling through Illinois a couple of weeks ago. It was actually St. Louis Public Radio. It was the first place I heard this reporting broad public support for the new interchange bill. And apparently the Illinois Retail Merchants Association commissioned this study. And if you read it, if anybody reads it, anybody who knows anything about this, like we talked about, nobody knows interchange. It's such a leading thing. They basically define interchange and the process as they want to. Do you want card companies to come to your house and kill your puppy? No. Okay, I guess you're against interchange. I don't know if this has come across your desk or not, but I've done my own little straw poll of 6 people in the state of Illinois, all college educated, different ages, none of whom are in the industry, asked them if they'd heard about this. No one had a clue this was even going on. I think that's the bottom line is this is really inside baseball when you get down to it, right?
Absolutely. And, and we don't know. And the question probably was very, very leading the way it was framed. So,
We have the
You
PDF of
like
the
not to
actual
pay
survey.
taxes.
We can send that. We can post that for people if you're interested. But
yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
John, I apologize for taking up too much time.
Oh, no, it's good. This was good
And
discussion.
Tom, thanks so much for jumping in.
Yeah, Tom.
Obviously, you know more about this than pretty much anybody,
Everybody.
not only on this call, but probably pretty much in the country. So I'm so happy to.
was,
Unfortunately, yes.
Tom or Hope was telling me that it was interesting, some of the conversation, between the community banks and the credit unions. There was some interesting stuff that's gone on there. So don't think that apparently this doesn't diminish. It's, the Hatfields and the McCoys can get together and not like a few things, but that doesn't mean they like each other any better. So that was interesting to me, what came out of it. All right. Well,
Right. I just got to point out Rob's comment. Push polling is the Guantanamo of research. I love that.
yeah.
Yeah, this is an absolute textbook case for that one.
Okay, so while I discuss this real fast, everybody else, there's only like 6 names and there's more people on here than that. So in for the drawing, so it's going to make it real easy. So if you're a credit union, put your name in, get it in there right now while I'm talking. Next week, we are going to do something I've been wanting to do.
There is a week, right? Next call. I think it's a couple weeks.
Next call. Next meeting, not next week, right? I'm out next week. We are going to be putting together, and we'd like you to fill this out. We'll also be emailing it. We're looking to collect fraud examples. What I've noted is fraud is escalating in a way that I've never seen before. And Tom, if you want to put this out to your group, we'd love that as well. But we've built a form, and basically in the form, we're asking the types of fraud you're seeing. And what I'm going to do with it between now and the next show is Glenn and I are going to parse through them and try to come up with the different types. For example, we heard from my buddy George Rudolph at Pennsylvania State Employees Credit Union. He was seeing some craziness around where they're using ChatGPT to find loopholes in your actual disclosures and then use that against you, which you can't just go in and fix. It's not a technical fix. It's a regulatory fix. It takes time for you to go back through the board and do it. In the meantime, you're losing money. Taking advantage of seniors, but convincing them in a way using AI that the crayon's the bad guy that didn't do their job and sending fake litigation papers to them. All kinds of crazy stuff that I'd never heard before. To crack the ice, to try to get people talking, I'll often just bring up fraud because it's something that usually we all engage in, but I had never heard so many different things, and it inspired me to do what I'm calling Fraudapalooza. And I think we're going to make Fraudapalooza a double time. So we're going to actually do it for an hour and a half.
I thought you meant we're going to have two. I thought we were going to have 2 stages. No, it just kind of double track. Yeah.
I don't know. We'll have to talk about that. I thought we were doubling it, but either way, we'll figure it out. And you'll know before you get there. But if you'll click this form and the form's up there at the top, or Melissa put it in, you can see it's a simple one. Tom, we'd love you to get this out to your group. We're going to try to categorize everything and figure out what the heck is going on, because we think that ChatGPT has just created a whole new genre and twists on the old stuff and on brand new stuff that we hadn't seen before. And our problem is it's happening sort of in a fractured way around the country, and different people are experiencing it at different times. So we're hoping to use the town hall to try to get everybody up to speed on what we're seeing, and before it migrates to your area. So with that said, please fill it out. We'll also be bombing you, send it to your friends, all of those folks. This is going to be a quick wheel. I don't see Scott on here, so let me double check and make sure, but I know he would have spoke up if he was here. Since Scott isn't here, yep, I guess I will do the honors of pressing the button. So we're going to give away what's that?
I say we've still only got 5 people that signed up for the giveaway, so if you want to
anybody
sign
else
up,
want in before we go?
hurry, put your name in the chat.
You got 20 seconds. Put your name in if you want $100. I mean, your chances right now are 1 in 6 if you put your name in. That's pretty good.
Let's just make an agreement to take $20 each.
Yeah, here we go. Ready? I want to press the button and we'll see who wins. You ready?
Yep.
All right, here we go. Bunk. Yeah. Oh, Tanya.
Woo, Tanya.
All right. Parkview Credit Union. All right, we'll make sure we get that out to you. And thank you all for a great town hall today. Tom Kane, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time. This is important to everyone. It's not something, it's not something that we should ignore. So I'm glad you guys are on it. You really have taken just an incredible effective defense for it. And thank goodness you guys are there to help, round up the issues. So congratulations to Tanya. And thank you, everyone, and have a great day. And please fill out the form. Fill out the form, fill out the form, fill out the form. I really want these. I'm very curious to see what everybody's seeing, and we're going to have an interesting time analyzing them. So help us out. All right.
Nice.
Thanks so much.